In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to use the whiteboard. The whiteboard is an important part of your interview process, and I generally recommend using the whiteboard whenever you have access to one. The whiteboard allows you to communicate things visually in addition to just verbal communication during your interview. This can be really important for explaining tough concepts, for figuring out how you want to explain things to the interviewer, and for just getting a point across in a crystal clear manner. So I'm going to go through about 6 tips with you today on how I generally recommend people to use the whiteboard during their interview. The first one is to enumerate. And this may come up a lot in our videos, but generally what we recommend is for candidates to always break big problems down into smaller chunks. Whether it's through numbers or through bullet points, it will create sort of a post-it effect where you can treat each idea separately, organize them in different ways, and communicate things in a much clearer, structured manner. So when you can, always try to enumerate your concepts, like I'm doing right now. The next suggestion I have is to put things in space. And so what I mean by that is with a whiteboard, you can actually write things in different spots on the whiteboard. And so, for example, if you wanted to treat 2 concepts differently, you can put them physically apart from each other. And this is actually really helpful because you can actually point to different concepts as you talk through them to make your point even clearer. So, for example, if I was saying this is the point 1 that I want to make, but for point 2, I want to make this point, I can sort of put my physical hand where the point is and guide the interviewer along of where I'm thinking about things. I think that's a really helpful tool to sort of organize thoughts visually in physical space. The other piece of advice I have is always to emphasize takeaways or key points that you want the interviewer to come away with. So if you have a thesis for your product or you have like a main conclusion that you draw, make sure you star it, emphasize it, circle it even, put a lot of emphasis on it so that it is treated sort of like a North Star for the exercise that you're doing. There are a lot of cases or types of problems that have different aspects of takeaways, whether it's the product vision of the whole product or whether it's the North Star metric for the A/B test that you're designing. But just make sure that you're always emphasizing these key takeaways or these key aspects that you want the interviewer to come away with if they had to come away with only one thing. I recommend having a little note section on your whiteboard where you can jot down some notes. So let's say as I'm talking, I think of, oh, that's a good idea. So I write down a little idea over there. I make a little note here. Treat this as sort of your playground and your little brainstorm space on the whiteboard where you can put down some ideas, put down some concepts, and you don't necessarily have to communicate them to the interviewer. You can actually just save them for later when you need to bring them up during some other point. So perhaps later on you might need to answer something about trade-offs, and perhaps when you went through the exercise, you thought of a couple trade-offs already, and then you loop them into your interview at the end of the interview answer when it's in a more appropriate time to bring those up. This is especially effective for people who happen to think of a lot of ideas at the same time and have trouble rambling or going on and on about ideas. If you have a point that might not be super related, you can write it down here and then come back to it if you need to. My 5th suggestion is always to diagram. Diagrams are great ways to communicate concepts. If you can diagram something, it's usually better to diagram it, whether it's a simple UI mock-up or maybe even just a little system of diagrams of how you're trying to explain a concept. A lot of people are shy about drawing because they think that they're not good drawers. And trust me, I'm not a good drawer either. I suck at drawing these things. However, it's a really good way to get something across, even if it's a crude diagram, even if it's a really crude diagram with messy lines and things like that. The point of that is to get the concept across. It's not to make it look beautiful or make it look the way that it would actually look when it was launched. On the point of messiness, the last tip that I always recommend is to keep things legible. If you write chicken scratch on the whiteboard, it kind of ruins the whole point of whiteboarding. You want to communicate concepts clearly and effectively to your interviewer, and if they can't read them, it won't work. One simple tip on this point that I really like to recommend is to leave a little bit of space between your points that you're trying to make. So in this case, let's say I thought of a new point that was a 1.5 point. So I still have a little bit of space on this board to fill in that point and to draw it out. It may get a little messy if you do that too much, so depending on how much space you need, I would practice a little bit at the whiteboard and make sure that you're in the right, you're organizing your thoughts clearly and effectively. But it does help to have a little bit of space and to just be intentional about the legibility when you write it on the whiteboard.